To Real Estate for Beginners. I'm Gershon Levy. In this episode, we're going to talk about the idea of escrow and define it. What is escrow? Along with talking about the other related escrow terms and diving into the idea of title versus deed and what a title company does during a real estate transaction. I hope you guys enjoy. So what is escrow? Well, generally in real estate, when we reference escrow, we're talking about the escrow period. I'm going into escrow, I fell out of escrow, but we don't really give a good definition of what escrow is. So I want to do that and then talk about the other escrow terms. I also want to talk about the idea of title versus deed in real estate, because that's going to inform us about the idea of ownership. And once we understand that, we're going to understand more about what the title company does during the escrow process, because their job is so important. So first, let's look at the idea of what escrow is. A good definition would be, escrow is a legal arrangement between two parties where a third party comes in and holds their property and or money until certain conditions are met. So let's apply this to real estate. Right? Escrow for us would be a legal arrangement where two parties, a buyer and a seller, right, come in and they have a third party come, a title company that holds property and or money until certain conditions are met. Those conditions for us would be the rules set forth in the purchase agreement, right? The buyer and the seller negotiated over a purchase agreement, and now that's going to inform the rules of the escrow period. Once certain conditions are met, the buyer can get the money, sign all the paperwork, and the seller can sign all the paperwork. Right at that point, the third party, the title company, will release the property and or money to the respective parties, right? The property goes to the buyer and the money goes to the seller. So escrow is a conditional legal arrangement. That's an easy idea to think about it, because certain things have to happen before other things happen. So let's write that down, a conditional legal arrangement. Now the escrow period is from the time in which we execute the contract and it's sent to the escrow officer to open escrow until the final contract date, the close of escrow, where the buyer becomes the owner and the seller gets their money. So escrow period is from contract to close. Now that escrow officer, once they receive that contract from the buyer and or the seller after it's executed, will open escrow. And the escrow officer works at the title company. Each title company has a couple different escrow officers, but there will be one specific escrow officer that runs point on each deal. And that's negotiated over when buyers and sellers are making offers to each other. Right? You can suggest a specific title company and a specific escrow officer at that title company. So let's put down works for Title Co. Now at the title company, each deal is going to have a specific escrow account. Inside of that escrow account is going to be held the buyer's earnest money deposit. Remember, the buyer has to put down a good faith deposit at the beginning of the deal, and the title company will hold that inside of the escrow account. So to denote that, we're going to put down EMD, earnest money deposit, for buyer, because this is where it's held. So when the buyer puts down the deposit, they're going to wire it to the title company. And again, the title company holds it in that account. Now let's look at title versus deed. So when we're thinking of the idea of ownership in real estate, right, what makes somebody an owner of something? Well, you can say that I got the paperwork, right? What does that mean? Let's think about the legal concept of ownership and the physical representation of it. So when we look at the idea of title versus deed, title is the legal concept of ownership. And once you understand the legal concept of ownership, you understand the rights that come with that concept of ownership. One of those rights is to be able to sell. So let's put down for title, legal concept of ownership. Legal concept of ownership. Now the deed, right, if title is the concept, the deed is the physical representation of it. I have the deed to my car. I have the deed to my house. We've heard people say this before, right? This is the physical representation. So I'm going to put down physical. And what's happening at the end of a transaction, right, the final day, on the close date, is the title company is helping facilitate a transfer where the physical deed, right, the new deed is being recorded with the county where you live, and that deed is now going to show the buyer as the owner of the property. So title is the legal concept and deed is the physical representation. So if we know that, then we know the title company is going to be obsessed with the idea of ownership for these properties. And that's exactly what their job is. When you're working with the title company, one of the first things they do is it's called a title search. I'll put that down, title search. They are searching to make sure that the seller is actually the seller, that they have the right to sell, that their name is on the paperwork, and that there's not other claims on this property. Let me give you an example why this is important. Let's say a person passes away and their property goes to their kids, right? And one of their kids decides to go and sell the property, okay? And they sell the property, they take all the money. Now, one of the siblings that maybe is not, close by or whatever comes and says, hey, I was entitled to 50% of those proceeds, right? And then there could be a legal battle that ensues. Title companies, right, and people that buy and sell homes don't want this to happen. So we need to make sure that before we enter into a transaction, that the person who is selling has the right to sell, and that once the proceeds from the sale happen, that they're going to the right place. So that's what the title company is obsessed with, is making sure that the seller is the rightful seller. Now, once they feel good about everything, what the title company will do is offer what's called title insurance. And if you're getting a loan, you have to get title insurance. It's called a lender's policy. And what this covers you as a buyer is what happens, let's say, if you buy a property and then somebody comes, let's say, a year later and says, hey, you shouldn't have been allowed to buy that property. I'm going to sue you for it because whoever you bought it from, they shouldn't have allowed it. In that case, if you're ruled against and you have to give up the property to that person, you have an outstanding loan that you just took out. So what will happen is the title company will then pay off the remaining amount of the loan, since, hey, it's their mistake, since they gave you insurance on that and you had the house taken from you, even though you thought there was no problem with you buying it. So title insurance is very important, and I'm going to put down here the most common one that's mandatory really if you're buying is a lender's policy. And then finally we have closing costs. Closing costs can include things like the cost for the title company to do their work, the cost of title insurance, lender fees, HOA fees, taxes. The most important thing to know is that closing costs should be about 1 to 2% of the total deal. So when you're budgeting, make sure the available cash you have is not just your down payment money. Make sure, let's say, if you're going to buy a $500,000 house, that you have $5,000 to $10,000 extra for closing costs. The series is not quite over yet, so make sure you watch the next video, and please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Have a great day, and thanks so much.